Before CGI gore and modern shock tactics, the 1960s quietly changed cinema forever. This decade dared to show violence as raw, sudden, and deeply unsettling. Guns fired without warning, blood spilled on dusty streets, and psychological terror crawled under the skin. These films didn't just entertain. They disturbed audiences, broke taboos, and redefined brutality on screen, leaving scars that still influence cinema today. Number 1. Psycho, 1960. Released in 1960, directed by Alfred Hitchcock and starring Anthony Perkins, Janet Leigh, Vera Miles, and John Gavin, Psycho is considered one of the most disturbing films of its era. The movie is based on Robert Bloch's novel, which was inspired by the real-life murderer Ed Gein. The story begins with Marion Crane, whose impulsive theft leads her to the isolated Bates Motel, managed by the shy and mysterious Norman Bates. The film shocked audiences with its dark tone and psychological brutality, especially the famous shower scene, which completely changed audience expectations of safety for main characters. Anthony Perkins' performance as Norman Bates became one of cinema's most iconic portrayals of a disturbed character. Instead of relying on graphic violence, Psycho created terror through suspense, music, and atmosphere. The film broke censorship boundaries and had a lasting influence on horror and thriller films, shaping the genre for decades to come. Number 2. Peeping Tom, 1960. Released in 1960, directed by Michael Powell, and starring Karl-Heinz Bohm, Anna Massey, and Moira Shearer, Peeping Tom is one of the most controversial and psychologically brutal films of its time. The story follows Mark Lewis, a shy cameraman who secretly films women as he murders them, capturing their fear at the moment of death. What made Peeping Tom especially disturbing was its focus on voyeurism and the psychology of a killer rather than traditional crime or action violence. The film openly explored themes of obsession, trauma, and the damaging effects of childhood abuse, which shocked audiences and critics in 1960. At the time of its release, the movie was heavily criticized and nearly destroyed director Michael Powell's career. However, years later, it was reevaluated and is now regarded as a classic that influenced modern psychological horror and slasher films. Its impact on cinema is now widely acknowledged by historians and critics alike. Number 3. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? 1962. Released in 1962, directed by Robert Aldrich and starring Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? Is a landmark psychological thriller of the 1960s. The film centers on two aging sisters, former child star Baby Jane Hudson and her wheelchair-bound sister Blanche, living together in a decaying Hollywood mansion. The movie's brutality comes from emotional cruelty and psychological torment rather than physical violence. Bette Davis delivers an unforgettable performance as the unhinged Jane, while Joan Crawford's Blanche is portrayed as helpless and terrified. The film shocked audiences with its dark themes of jealousy, bitterness, and mental instability, especially coming from two classic Hollywood icons. Its disturbing atmosphere, grotesque makeup, and tense performances made it a major box office success. Today, the film is widely recognized as a classic that helped popularize the psycho-biddy or psychological horror subgenre in American cinema. Number 4. The Killers, 1964. Released in 1964, directed by Don Siegel and starring Lee Marvin, Angie Dickinson, John Cassavetes, and Ronald Reagan. The Killers is a hard-hitting crime thriller based on Ernest Hemingway's short story. The film follows two professional hitmen investigating why their latest target offered no resistance to his own murder. The movie stood out in the 1960s for its cold, ruthless violence and cynical tone. Lee Marvin's performance as a relentless assassin is especially memorable, presenting violence as efficient and emotionless rather than dramatic. The film also gained historical importance as Ronald Reagan's final acting role before entering politics. With its sharp editing, brutal shootouts, and morally bleak world, The Killers reflected the growing darkness of 1960s cinema. It is now regarded as one of the era's toughest crime films and a key influence on later neo-noir and action thrillers. Number 5. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967. Released in 1967, directed by Arthur Penn and starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, Bonnie and Clyde became one of the most violent and controversial films of the 1960s. The movie is based on the true story of Depression-era criminals Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, who gained notoriety for their bank robberies and murders across the United States. The film shocked audiences with its graphic depiction of gun violence, especially its slow-motion final ambush scene, which was unprecedented at the time. Rather than glorifying crime, the movie showed the sudden, brutal consequences of violence in a raw and realistic way. Bonnie and Clyde marked a turning point in Hollywood, signaling the end of old censorship limits and the rise of new Hollywood cinema. Its bold style, violent realism, and anti-hero characters influenced countless crime films that followed and permanently changed how violence was portrayed on screen. Number 6. The Wild Bunch, 1969. Released in 1969, directed by Sam Peckinpah and starring William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Robert Ryan, and Warren Oates, The Wild Bunch is widely regarded as one of the most brutally violent films of the 1960s. Set in 1913, the film follows a group of aging outlaws trying to survive in a rapidly changing world. The movie revolutionized screen violence with its graphic bloodshed, rapid editing, and slow-motion gunfights. Sam Peckinpah deliberately portrayed violence as chaotic and devastating, stripping away any sense of heroism. The climactic shootout shocked audiences and critics alike, pushing cinematic boundaries further than ever before. The Wild Bunch was controversial at release, but later earned critical acclaim for its realism and artistic influence. Today, it is considered a landmark Western that redefined the genre and paved the way for more explicit and realistic portrayals of violence in modern cinema. Number 7. Point Blank, 1967. Released in 1967, directed by John Borman and starring Lee Marvin, Point Blank is a gritty and unusually violent crime thriller for its time. The film follows a betrayed criminal, Walker, who is left for dead and then relentlessly hunts down the organization that double-crossed him for his stolen money. Unlike traditional crime films of the era, Point Blank presents violence in a cold, mechanical, and almost emotionless manner. Lee Marvin's performance is minimal and intimidating, turning the character into a near-unstoppable force. The movie's fragmented storytelling, stark visuals, and brutal tone made it feel modern and unsettling to 1960s audiences. Although not a massive hit on release, the film later gained critical recognition for its bold style and influence on neo-noir cinema. Today, Point Blank is seen as a major step toward the darker, more violent crime films of the 1970s. Number 8. Cape Fear, 1962. Released in 1962, directed by J. Lee Thompson and starring Gregory Peck, Robert Mitchum, and Polly Bergen, Cape Fear is a tense psychological thriller that terrified audiences with its stalking and suspenseful terror. The film tells the story of ex-convict Max Cady, who seeks revenge on lawyer Sam Bowden, believing Bowden failed to protect him during his imprisonment. What made Cape Fear particularly brutal was its relentless psychological manipulation and menacing atmosphere rather than overt gore. Robert Mitchum's performance as the menacing and vengeful Cady is chilling, portraying a character whose presence alone generates fear. The film pushed boundaries for the depiction of threats and intimidation in mainstream cinema, using tension, music, and suspense to unsettle viewers. Cape Fear is now recognized as a classic thriller, influencing many later suspense and psychological horror films, and it cemented the standard for cinematic tension and the portrayal of relentless villains. Number 9. Straitjacket, 1964. Released in 1964, directed by William Castle and starring Joan Crawford, Diane Baker, and Leif Erikson, Straitjacket is a chilling psychological thriller that combines suspense with shocking brutality. The film follows Lucy Harbin, a woman released from a mental institution after murdering her husband and his lover, as a series of murders begins to occur around her once again. The movie's tension comes from fear, suspicion, and psychological torment rather than graphic gore. Joan Crawford delivers a gripping performance as a woman struggling with her past and the suspicion of those around her, making audiences question whether she is truly innocent or a repeat killer. William Castle's direction emphasizes suspense, with dramatic reveals and moments of sudden terror that unsettled 1960s audiences. Straitjacket became a classic of the psycho-thriller genre, showcasing early explorations of female-centered horror and the psychological dimensions of violence in cinema. Number 10. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. Released in 1968, directed by George A. Romero and starring Dwayne Jones, Judith O'Dea, and Carl Hardman, Night of the Living Dead is a groundbreaking horror film that redefines cinematic brutality. The story follows a group of people trapped in a rural farmhouse, fighting for survival against relentless, flesh-eating zombies. The film shocked audiences with its unprecedented graphic violence, stark black-and-white imagery, and bleak ending. Unlike earlier monster movies, Romero presented zombies as relentless, cannibalistic threats, making the horror feel immediate and realistic. Dwayne Jones' performance as Ben brought depth and authority, and the film also addressed social tensions of the 1960s in subtle ways. Night of the Living Dead became a cult classic, influencing countless horror films and establishing the modern zombie genre. Its raw, unflinching depiction of violence and fear left a lasting mark on cinema, proving that horror could be both terrifying and socially resonant. These 10 films from the 1960s didn't just entertain. They pushed boundaries, shocked audiences, and redefined cinematic violence. From psychological terror to graphic brutality, each movie challenged social norms and censorship rules of its time. Directors like Hitchcock, Peckinpah, and Romero showed that fear could be intense, realistic, and unforgettable. The legacy of these films still echoes in modern horror, thriller, and crime cinema, proving that the 1960s were truly a revolutionary era for brutal storytelling.